Sometimes life teaches us lessons in the most unexpected ways. Today's story is about a father who was cast aside by his own son when he needed him most. But fate had other plans, and what happened next changed everything. This is the story of Walter Thompson, a 68-year-old retired mechanic who went from being called just a burden to making a decision that would leave his ungrateful son completely speechless. Stay with me until the end to find out how Walter taught his son the true meaning of family and the consequences of turning your back on loved ones. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Walter Thompson had always been a hard worker. For over 40 years, he owned and operated Thompson's Auto Shop in the small town of Millfield, Ohio. His hands, now wrinkled and spotted with age, had fixed thousands of cars and earned the respect of everyone in town. Walter was known for his fair prices and honest work, qualities he had tried to instill in his only son, Bradley. Bradley Thompson had grown up watching his father work tirelessly at the auto shop. Unlike Walter, who had been content with his modest but fulfilling life in Millfield, Bradley had always dreamed of bigger things. By the time he was in his 30s, Bradley had moved to Chicago, where he worked as an investment banker. He lived in a luxury high-rise apartment with his wife Melissa and their 2 children, Emma and Jake, whom Walter rarely got to see. After Walter's wife Linda passed away from cancer 5 years ago, his life had become increasingly lonely. The auto shop had been sold to fund Linda's medical treatments, and Walter now lived off his modest savings and Social Security checks in the same 3-bedroom house where Bradley had grown up. Walter had always been independent, refusing to burden anyone with his problems. But last winter, disaster struck when a severe storm damaged the roof of his home. Water leaked through the ceiling, causing significant damage to the upstairs bedrooms and the living room below. The repair estimate came to $18,000, money that Walter simply didn't have. After weighing his options for days, Walter finally decided to call his son. It had been almost 8 months since they last spoke, which had been a brief call on Walter's birthday. Bradley was always too busy to visit, and their phone conversations had grown shorter and less frequent over the years. "Hello?" Bradley answered, sounding distracted. "Bradley, it's Dad," Walter said, his voice betraying a mix of relief and anxiety. "Oh, hey, Dad. What's up? I'm heading into a meeting in a few minutes." Walter took a deep breath. "Son, I hate to ask, but I'm in a bit of a tight spot. The storm last month damaged the roof and, let me guess, you need money," Bradley interrupted. "Well, yes. The repairs are going to cost $18,000, and I just don't have that kind of money right now. I was hoping you could help. I can pay you back a little each month from my Social Security." The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably before Bradley finally responded. "Dad, do you know how busy I am? I've got clients, worth millions of dollars depending on me. I've got my own family to take care of. My kids' private school tuition is due, and Melissa and I are planning a vacation to the Bahamas next month. I understand you're busy, son. I wouldn't ask if—" "It wasn't important," Walter said, his voice soft. "Important? Dad, you've been living in that outdated house for decades. Maybe it's time to sell it and move into one of those retirement communities. I can't keep bailing you out every time something goes wrong." Walter flinched at the words. "This is the first time I've ever asked you for money, Bradley." "And it won't be the last," Bradley retorted. "Look, I'm sorry, but at your age, you're just going to be more and more of a burden. I've got my own life to live." The words struck Walter like a physical blow. "A burden? Is that what I am to you?" "Dad, that's not what I—" "No, I think you've made yourself perfectly clear," Walter said, his voice suddenly steady. "Don't worry about it. I'll figure something out. Enjoy your meeting." Walter hung up before Bradley could respond. He sat at his kitchen table, the phone clutched in his trembling hand as tears welled in his eyes. The house around him, the house where he'd raised his son, where he and Linda had built their life, together, was falling apart, and his only child had just called him a burden. For the next few days, Walter moved through his life in a daze. He called a few friends to see if they could help with the repairs, but everyone was going through their own financial struggles. He visited the bank to see about a loan, but his fixed income made him a poor candidate. He even considered selling his prized possession, a restored 1967 Chevrolet Impala that he and Linda had bought when they were first married, but he couldn't bring himself to part with it. Then, on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks after the call, with Bradley, Walter stopped at Parker's convenience store to pick up a newspaper and decided on a whim to buy a lottery ticket. Something he did occasionally, more as a ritual than with any expectation of winning. That evening, Walter sat in his recliner, absently checking the lottery numbers while a baseball game played quietly on the television. He glanced down at his ticket and then back at the screen, not quite processing what he was seeing. Slowly, he looked at each number again. 17, 23, 36, 42, 51. All 6 numbers matched. Walter's hands began to shake as he checked the prize amount. $57 million. That can't be right, he muttered to himself, reaching for his reading glasses to double-check the numbers. But there was no mistake. Walter Thompson, a 68-year-old retired mechanic with a leaking roof and an ungrateful son, had just won the lottery. The next morning, Walter drove to the Ohio Lottery Commission office in Cleveland. After confirming his win and discussing his options, he chose to take the lump sum payment of $34.2 million, which would amount to approximately $24 million after taxes. As he drove home, Walter's mind raced with possibilities. He could buy a new house, several new houses in fact. He could travel the world. He could donate to the cancer research center that had treated Linda. And most pressingly, he could fix his roof. But as he pulled into his driveway and looked at the home he'd lived in for over 40 years, another thought occurred to him. Bradley's words echoed in his mind. At your age, you're just going to be more and more of a burden. Walter sat in his car for a long time, thinking about his son, his grandchildren, and the life he'd lived. By the time he entered his house, a plan was beginning to form. The following weekend, Walter hired a local contractor named Jim Reeves to fix his roof. Jim had been one of Walter's loyal customers at the auto shop, and he offered Walter a fair price. Walter paid in cash but asked Jim to keep the job quiet. I don't want people treating me differently because of my good fortune, Walter explained. Jim agreed, and within a week, the roof was repaired. Walter then hired a modest cleaning service to help with the water damage inside, and soon his house was back in order. To anyone looking from the outside, nothing had changed about Walter Thompson's life. But everything had changed. Walter now had millions of dollars sitting in a newly established bank account, and a plan that would teach his son a lesson he would never forget. What Bradley didn't realize was that his father, the man he had dismissed as just a burden, was about to make a decision that would leave him completely speechless. As Walter sat at his kitchen table that evening, sipping a cup of coffee and looking out at the backyard where Bradley had once played as a child, he pulled out a notebook and began to write. The first line read, "The Walter Thompson Family Foundation." His son had made it clear that family didn't matter to him anymore. Now Walter was going to show him exactly what that meant. The first order of business for Walter was to find a reliable attorney who could help him navigate his newfound wealth. After asking around discreetly, he scheduled an appointment with Diana Cortez, a respected estate attorney in Cleveland who specialized in wealth management. Diana's office was located in a sleek downtown building, the kind of place Walter would have felt out of place in just a few weeks ago. But today, he walked in with purpose, dressed in his best button-down shirt and khakis, carrying a folder containing all his lottery documentation. "Mr. Thompson, congratulations on your windfall," Diana said, as she welcomed him into her office. I understand you'd like to discuss estate planning and wealth management? Walter nodded as he settled into the leather chair across from her desk. Yes, but with some specific requirements. I want to establish a foundation, make some charitable donations, and set aside money for my grandchildren. But I also want to teach my son a valuable lesson. Over the next 2 hours, Walter shared his story with Diana, how he'd worked his entire life to provide for his family, how Bradley had moved away and gradually distanced himself, and finally, how his son had called him just a burden when he'd asked for help with the roof. I don't want revenge, Walter explained, his voice steady. I want my son to understand what truly matters in life. And I want to make sure my grandchildren don't grow up with the same values Bradley seems to have adopted. Diana listened attentively, occasionally jotting notes on her legal pad. When Walter finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied him for a moment. What you're proposing is unusual, Mr. Thompson, but entirely legal. Let me outline how we could proceed. Diana's plan was comprehensive. First, they would establish the Walter Thompson Family Foundation with $10 million focused on supporting elderly individuals who needed home repairs and medical assistance. The foundation would prioritize helping those whose families couldn't or wouldn't provide support, people who, like Walter, had found themselves vulnerable in their golden years. Next, they would set up trust funds for Emma and Jake, Walter's grandchildren, with $5 million each. However, these trusts would come with specific conditions. The children wouldn't receive any money until they turned 25, and even then, they would need to demonstrate a commitment to community service and family values. Additionally, Walter would establish a scholarship fund of $2 million at Millfield High School, his and Bradley's alma mater. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. And what about Bradley? Diana asked. You mentioned wanting to teach him a lesson. Walter smiled slightly. That's where things get interesting. I want to offer Bradley a choice, one that will reveal his true character not just to me, but to himself. The plan for Bradley was both simple and profound. Walter would offer his son a matched giving arrangement. For every dollar Bradley contributed to helping others in need, Walter would match it up to $1 million. But there was a catch. Bradley would need to personally volunteer with the recipients of his donations, spending at least 4 hours a week with them for a minimum of 1 year. If he refuses, Walter explained, I'll donate that $1 million to charitable causes anyway. But Bradley will receive nothing from my estate beyond a small token inheritance of $5,000. That's quite a test, Diana remarked. Are you prepared for the possibility that he might choose the token inheritance? Walter nodded, his expression solemn. I have to be. This isn't about the money. It's about helping Bradley rediscover the values I thought I had taught him. If he can't do that, then at least my wealth will help others who truly need and appreciate it. With the plan outlined, Diana drafted the necessary documents. Walter decided to keep his lottery win a secret for now, even from Bradley. He wanted to observe his son's behavior for a bit longer before revealing the truth. 3 months passed. Walter's roof was fixed, his house was back in order, and he had made a few modest improvements to his property. Nothing extravagant that would raise eyebrows in the small town of Millfield. He'd replaced his aging Ford with a newer model Toyota, telling neighbors it was a good deal he couldn't pass up. The Walter Thompson Family Foundation was now officially established, with Diana serving as one of the board members alongside Walter and 2 other trusted friends from Millfield. During these months, Bradley hadn't called once to check on his father or to see if he'd managed to fix the roof. Walter had sent birthday cards to his grandchildren with modest checks enclosed, $50 each, the same amount he'd always sent before his lottery win, but Bradley hadn't even called to confirm they'd received them. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, Walter received an unexpected call from Chicago. Dad? It's Bradley. Bradley, Walter replied, keeping his tone neutral. This is a surprise. Yeah, well, I've been thinking about our last conversation. I may have been a bit harsh. Walter waited, letting the silence stretch between them. Bradley cleared his throat uncomfortably. Anyway, I was wondering if you got the roof fixed. I did. Thank you for asking. Good, good. Listen, Dad. Melissa and I are thinking of bringing the kids to visit for Thanksgiving this year. It's been a while since they've seen the old homestead. Walter raised an eyebrow at the sudden interest. That would be nice. Emma and Jake are always welcome here. You too, of course. Great. We'll plan on it then. Bradley's tone brightened. Oh, and Dad? I've been meaning to ask, have you given any more thought to downsizing? Real estate in your area has been appreciating, and I've got a client who's a fantastic realtor. He could get you top dollar for the house. And there it was, the real reason for the call. Not concern for Walter's welfare, but another attempt to get him to sell the family home. Walter felt a familiar disappointment settle in his chest, but he kept his voice even. I'm comfortable where I am for now, Bradley, but I appreciate your concern. After they hung up, Walter sat at his kitchen table contemplating the conversation. It was clear that Bradley still saw him primarily as a financial issue to be managed rather than as a father to be cherished. The Thanksgiving visit would be the perfect opportunity to set his plan in motion. Thanksgiving Day arrived with a light dusting of snow covering Millfield. Walter had spent the previous week preparing the house, stocking the refrigerator, and making sure the guest rooms were ready for Bradley's family. He'd even hired a local caterer to prepare the Thanksgiving meal, a luxury he could now afford, but one that wouldn't seem too suspicious to Bradley. The doorbell rang at precisely 3 p.m. Walter took a deep breath and opened the door to find Bradley standing there with Melissa and the children. Bradley looked exactly as Walter remembered, tall and lean, dressed in expensive casual clothes, his dark hair now showing hints of gray at the temples. Melissa, blonde and elegant in a designer sweater and boots, offered a polite smile. Behind them stood Emma, now 14, engrossed in her phone, and Jake, 10, who looked up at his grandfather with curiosity. Welcome, Walter said, stepping aside to let them in. It's good to see all of you. The initial greetings were awkward, filled with superficial pleasantries and careful comments about how well everyone looked. Bradley made a show of inspecting the newly repaired roof and nodding approvingly, though Walter noticed his son's eyes calculating the value of the repair. Dinner was pleasant enough, with conversation focusing mainly on the children's activities, Emma's success on her school debate team, and Jake's passion for soccer. Bradley shared carefully edited stories about his work successes, while Melissa discussed their recent vacation to the Bahamas. No one asked Walter about his life until dessert was served. So, Dad? Bradley said, cutting into his pumpkin pie. How have you been keeping busy these days? Walter smiled. Actually, I've been doing some volunteer work at the senior center, in town. And I've made some new investments. Bradley's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Investments? What kind of investments? Various things, Walter replied vaguely. I've been learning a lot about financial planning lately. Bradley and Melissa exchanged glances. Dad, you know you should consult with a professional before making any significant financial decisions, Bradley said, his tone suddenly concerned. I'd be happy to look over your portfolio. That's kind of you, son, but I've got good advice. Walter took a sip of his coffee. In fact, I've been thinking a lot about the future lately, about family, legacy, and what truly matters. That's actually something we wanted to discuss with you, Melissa interjected smoothly. We found the most charming retirement community just outside of Chicago. It's close enough that we could visit regularly, and they have excellent health care. Facilities. Walter nodded thoughtfully. I appreciate the suggestion, but I've decided to stay in Millfield for now. I have some projects in the works that I'm quite excited about. After dinner, while Melissa helped the children settle into their rooms and Bradley took a business call, Walter retreated to his study. From the safe hidden behind a landscape painting, a new addition to his home, he retrieved an envelope containing several documents. Later that evening, when the children were engrossed in watching a movie in the living room and Melissa had gone to bed claiming travel fatigue, Walter invited Bradley to join him in the study for a drink. "Scotch?" Walter offered, pouring himself a small measure of a brand he'd never have considered buying before his lottery win. Bradley nodded, looking around the study with interest. "You've made some changes in here." "Small improvements," Walter agreed, handing his son a glass. "Bradley, there's something important I need to discuss with you." Bradley settled into an armchair, his expression shifting to one of practiced patience, the look Walter had seen him give elderly clients at the bank when he'd visited his son at work years ago. "I'm listening, Dad." Walter took a seat across from his son and placed the envelope on the coffee table between them. "3 months ago, something extraordinary happened. I won the lottery." Bradley's practiced expression faltered, his eyes widening in genuine surprise. "You... what?" "I won $57 million in the Ohio State Lottery. After taxes, I received a lump sum of approximately $24 million. The scotch in Bradley's glass sloshed dangerously as his hand trembled. That's incredible, Dad. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I had some thinking to do," Walter replied calmly. "About what to do with the money, about my legacy, and about our relationship." Bradley leaned forward, setting his glass down carefully. "Of course, that's a lot to process. You know, I could introduce you to my wealth management team. They handle the portfolios of some very successful clients." "That won't be necessary," Walter said. "I've already established a relationship with an excellent attorney who specializes in estate planning. In fact, most of the money has already been allocated." Bradley's eager expression faltered. "Allocated? What do you mean, allocated?" Walter opened the envelope and removed several documents. "I've established a foundation with $10 million, dedicated to helping elderly individuals who need assistance with home repairs and medical bills. I've set up trust funds for Emma and Jake with $5 million each, which they'll access when they turn 25, provided they meet certain conditions related to community service and family values. And I've created a $2 million scholarship fund at Millfield High School." As Walter spoke, he watched Bradley's face cycle through various emotions: shock, confusion, and finally, barely concealed calculation. "That's very generous, Dad," Bradley said carefully. "But wouldn't it make sense to consult with family before making such significant financial decisions? After all, we could have discussed the best way to manage this windfall together." Walter nodded as if considering this point. "Perhaps. But after our last phone conversation, when you called me just a burden, I realized we might have different priorities when it comes to family and money." Bradley flinched at the reminder. "Dad, about that. I was stressed that day. I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "I understand," Walter said, his voice gentle but firm. "Which is why I've designed a special arrangement for you." He handed Bradley the final document from the envelope. "This outlines what I'm calling the Thompson Family Legacy Challenge. For every dollar you contribute to helping others in need, people like me, who find themselves requiring assistance in their later years, I will match it, up to $1 million. Bradley scanned the document, his brow furrowing. "There's more to it than that, though, isn't there?" "Yes," Walter confirmed. "You'll need to personally volunteer with the recipients of your donations. 4 hours a week, minimum, for at least 1 year. You'll need to get to know them, understand their struggles, and help them directly, not just by writing checks, but with your time and energy." Bradley looked up from the document, his expression a mixture of disbelief and calculation. "And if I don't accept this challenge?" Walter met his son's gaze steadily. then you'll receive a token inheritance of $5,000, and the matching million will go to the foundation anyway. The silence that filled the study was profound. Outside, light snow had begun to fall, coating the windows with delicate frost patterns. Bradley stared at his father as if seeing him for the first time. "You're serious about this," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Completely serious," Walter confirmed. "This isn't about punishing you, Bradley. It's about giving you an opportunity to reconnect with values that I fear you've lost along the way. Values I tried to teach you growing up. Compassion, generosity, and the understanding that family means more than financial convenience." Bradley set the document down slowly. His hands were no longer trembling, but his face had gone pale. "I need to think about this." "Of course," Walter agreed. "Take all the time you need. The offer doesn't expire until my birthday in May. 6 months should be enough time to decide what kind of legacy you want to build and what example you want to set for Emma and Jake." As Bradley rose to leave the study, Walter added softly, "One more thing. I'd appreciate it if you didn't mention the specifics of my lottery win to the children just yet. I want them to enjoy their visit without the distraction of sudden wealth." Bradley nodded stiffly and left the room without another word. Walter remained in his chair, sipping his scotch and watching the snow fall outside the window. He had no idea whether his son would accept the challenge or take the token inheritance, but for the first time in years, he felt he had done right by the values he and Linda had tried to instill in their only child. Whatever Bradley decided, Walter knew his own path forward was clear. The foundation would help people who needed it. His grandchildren would have security and, hopefully, guidance toward becoming compassionate adults. And Walter himself would spend his remaining years trying to make a positive difference in his community, the same community that had supported his auto shop for 4 decades. As he finished his drink and prepared to join the rest of the family, Walter smiled to himself. The expression on Bradley's face when he'd revealed his lottery win and subsequent plans had indeed been speechless. But what happened next would reveal far more about his son's character than any amount of money ever could. The remainder of the Thanksgiving weekend passed in a strange atmosphere of tension and forced politeness. Bradley spent most of Friday on his phone in the guest room, emerging only for meals. Melissa, sensing something had changed between father and son, tried to compensate with excessive cheerfulness, complimenting Walter on everything from his table settings to the new curtains in the living room. The children, however, provided genuine moments of connection. Jake discovered Walter's collection of model cars in the basement, remnants of a hobby Walter had enjoyed with Bradley when he was young, and asked his grandfather to show him how to build one. They spent Saturday morning working on a 1965 Mustang model, Jake's small fingers carefully applying decals, while Walter shared stories about the real cars he'd worked on throughout his career. Emma, initially distant behind her perpetual screen, gradually warmed up when Walter showed interest in her debate team activities. By Saturday afternoon, she was sitting at the kitchen table with him, practicing her arguments for an upcoming competition about climate change policy. "You're really good at asking tough questions, Grandpa," she said, looking impressed after Walter had challenged one of her key points, forcing her to strengthen her reasoning. "Just because I'm old doesn't mean I don't keep up with what's happening in the world," Walter replied with a wink. "Your generation has important work to do, and I'm glad you're preparing to be part of it." Emma smiled, a genuine smile that reminded Walter painfully of Bradley at her age, before ambition and materialism had hardened his outlook. On Sunday morning, as the family prepared to leave, Walter gave Emma and Jake each an envelope. "Just a little something to remember your old grandpa by," he said. "Don't open them until you get home." The envelopes contained personalized letters he'd written, along with gift cards to their favorite stores, modest amounts that wouldn't raise Bradley's suspicions. But the letters were what mattered most to Walter. To Emma, he'd written about the importance of using her intelligence and debate skills to stand up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. To Jake, he'd emphasized the value of craftsmanship and patience, of building things meant to last. As Bradley loaded the last suitcase into their SUV, Walter approached his son. "Have you had time to think about what we discussed?" he asked quietly. Bradley glanced toward the car, where Melissa was helping the children buckle up. "I need more time, Dad. This isn't a simple decision." Walter nodded. "I understand. Remember, you have until May." Bradley hesitated, then asked in a low voice, "Why are you doing this? If you wanted to help people, you could just donate the money without involving me in some kind of moral test." Walter considered his answer carefully. "Because I believe you're better than the person you've become. I believe the son Linda and I raised is still in there somewhere, beneath the expensive suits and the concerns about status. And because I love you too much to let wealth drive us further apart." For a moment, something vulnerable flashed across Bradley's face, a glimpse of the boy who used to help Walter in the auto shop on weekends, eager to learn and eager to please. Then his expression closed again, and he extended his hand formally. "We'll be in touch, Dad." Walter ignored the hand and pulled his son into a hug instead. After a moment of stiffness, Bradley returned it briefly before pulling away and walking to the car without looking back. December passed without word from Bradley. Walter sent Christmas presents to Chicago, hand-selected items for each family member, thoughtful but not extravagant, and received a generic holiday card in return. Signed by all four Thompsons but clearly chosen and sent by Melissa January, brought heavy snow to Millfield. Walter, who had always shoveled his own driveway despite neighbors' offers of help, hired a local teenager named Marcus to handle the task this winter. The boy's family was struggling after his father had been laid off from the factory in the next town over, and Walter paid him generously without making it seem like charity. With Diana's help, Walter had begun the foundation's work in earnest. They established headquarters in a small, vacant storefront on Millfield's main street, hiring a small staff to manage applications and coordinate contractors. By February, the Walter Thompson Family Foundation had already helped 7 elderly residents in Millfield and surrounding towns with critical home repairs, fixing furnaces, replacing broken windows, repairing leaking plumbing, and in one case, installing a wheelchair ramp for a Vietnam veteran who could no longer navigate his front steps. Walter personally visited each recipient, not as the foundation's wealthy benefactor, but as a concerned neighbor. He shared coffee at their kitchen tables, listened to their stories, and often found himself making return visits simply for companionship. Many of these seniors were in situations similar to his own, widowed or divorced, with children who had moved away and rarely visited. They understood what it meant to be viewed as a burden by the very people they had spent their lives nurturing. In March, Walter received an unexpected phone call from Chicago. It wasn't Bradley, but Emma, calling from what she said was a friend's phone. "Grandpa? It's Emma. Do you have a minute to talk?" "For you?" "I have all the time in the world," Walter replied, settling into his recliner. "Is everything okay?" "I guess so. I mean, nothing's wrong exactly. It's just, Mom and Dad have been acting weird since Thanksgiving. Dad seems stressed all the time, and they keep having these whispered arguments they think I can't hear." Walter chose his words carefully. "Your dad has some important decisions to make. Sometimes adults get tense when they're facing tough choices." "Is it about the lottery? I heard Mom mention something about it." Walter sighed. "So much for keeping the children out of it." "Yes, partly. I came into some money recently, and your dad and I have different ideas about how to handle it. Are you guys fighting over it? Because that would be really stupid. It's just money." Walter couldn't help but smile at his granddaughter's blunt assessment. "You're right. It is just money. But sometimes money brings out complicated feelings in people. The important thing is that none of this affects how much I love you and Jake." "I know that, Grandpa." Emma was quiet for a moment, then added, "Dad's been talking a lot about moving you to Chicago to some place called Lakeview Retirement Village. He showed us brochures. It looks fancy, but kind of sad. And what do you think about that idea? Walter asked. I think you should live wherever makes you happy, Emma said firmly. And I don't think you'd be happy in a place where they schedule your whole day and treat you like you're incapable of making your own decisions. Walter's heart swelled with pride. That's very insightful, Emma. Thank you for telling me. I should go. I told Mom I was calling Zoe about homework, but I wanted you to know that whatever Dad decides, Jake and I still want to visit this summer, if that's okay. More than okay, Walter assured her. My door is always open to both of you. After hanging up, Walter sat thinking about his granddaughter's words. Bradley was clearly struggling with the decision Walter had presented him, perhaps even exploring alternatives like convincing Walter to move to Chicago where he could have more control over his father, and potentially his father's money. The following week brought another surprise, a text message from Bradley requesting a video call. When Walter accepted the call, he found himself looking at his son's face on the screen. Bradley appeared tired, with dark circles under his eyes, and his normally perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled. Dad, I've been doing some research, Bradley began without preamble. About your foundation, Walter raised an eyebrow. Oh? You've helped, 7 families so far? Mostly in Millfield? That's right, Walter confirmed. People who needed critical home repairs but couldn't afford them. And you're personally involved in every case. It wasn't a question. I am. I visit each recipient, make sure the work is being done properly, and check in afterward to see if they need anything else. Bradley ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture Walter hadn't seen since his son was a teenager preparing for college interviews. Why didn't you just hire someone to do all that? You're the donor. You don't need to be hands-on with every project. Walter smiled slightly. Because that's exactly the point of the foundation, Bradley. It's not just about writing checks. It's about human connection. About recognizing that people need more than just financial assistance. They need to know someone cares about their well-being. Bradley was silent for a long moment, his eyes avoiding the camera. Finally, he asked, How much time do you actually spend with these people? It varies. Sometimes just an initial visit and a follow-up. Other times, I've found myself becoming a regular visitor. Margaret Wilson, she lives over on Elm Street, had her furnace replaced in January. She teaches me canasta every Wednesday afternoon now. And Frank Donovan, the veteran who needed the wheelchair ramp, turns out he served in the same unit as my cousin Rick. We've been going through his war photographs together, identifying people he'd lost touch with. Bradley nodded slowly, seemingly processing this information. I've been thinking about your offer. And? Walter prompted when his son didn't continue. I need to see it for myself, what you're doing, how it works. I'm coming to Millfield next weekend. Alone. Walter couldn't hide his surprise. What about Melissa and the kids? Melissa has a charity gala on Saturday. The kids will stay with her parents. Bradley hesitated, then added, I haven't told her about your challenge yet. I wanted to understand it better first. I see, Walter said. Well, you're welcome any time, son. I'll make up the guest room. No need. I'll stay at the Hampton Inn by the interstate. This is a fact-finding trip, Dad, not a family visit. Bradley's tone was businesslike, but Walter detected uncertainty beneath the professional veneer. As you wish. Should I pick you up at the airport? I'm driving. I'll arrive Friday evening around 7. Bradley paused, then added, And Dad? I'd appreciate it if we could keep this between us for now. After ending the call, Walter sat back and considered this unexpected development. Was Bradley genuinely interested in the Foundation's work, or was he simply gathering information to help him decide whether the $1 million match was worth the time investment? Either way, the fact that he was coming to Millfield, alone and without telling Melissa, suggested that Walter's challenge had affected him more deeply than he wanted to admit. Bradley arrived precisely at 7 on Friday evening, pulling into Walter's driveway in a sleek black Audi. He carried only an overnight bag despite his stated plan to stay at the hotel, and accepted Walter's offer of dinner with minimal resistance. Over a simple meal of pot roast and potatoes, Linda's recipe, which Walter had perfected over the years, father and son engaged in careful conversation. Bradley asked about the foundation's structure, its selection criteria for recipients, and its long-term sustainability plan. Walter answered honestly, explaining that Diana had helped him establish proper governance and financial controls to ensure the foundation could continue its work indefinitely. "I'm impressed," Bradley admitted reluctantly as they cleared the dishes. "You've created something quite professional in a short time. Just because I fixed cars for a living doesn't mean I can't understand organizational structure," Walter replied mildly. "Besides, I have good advisors. Diana is excellent at what she does." Bradley's expression tightened at the mention of Diana, the estate attorney Walter had chosen instead of consulting his own son. "I'd still like to review the foundation's finances. As a financial professional, I might spot opportunities for improvement. I'll speak with Diana about arranging that," Walter agreed. "Now, about tomorrow. I've scheduled visits to 3 of our recipients. You'll come along, observe, and you can ask any questions afterward." Bradley looked like he wanted to object to being given a schedule, but he simply nodded. "Fine. What time do we start?" 8 a.m. Wear comfortable shoes and nothing too fancy. These aren't formal meetings. The next morning, Bradley arrived promptly at 8, dressed in what Walter recognized as his son's idea of casual clothes: designer jeans, a cashmere sweater, and loafers that probably cost more than Walter's entire wardrobe. Walter said nothing, simply handing his son a travel mug of coffee and leading him to his Toyota. Their first visit was to Margaret Wilson, the 82-year-old widow who had taught Walter canasta. Her small bungalow had needed a new furnace, and insulation after the old heating system failed during a cold snap in January. The foundation had covered the $7,500 cost, and Walter had checked in regularly ever since. Margaret welcomed them warmly, insisting they sit at her kitchen table while she served homemade cinnamon rolls. Bradley seemed uncomfortable at first, perching stiffly on a kitchen chair and answering Margaret's friendly questions with minimal responses. But as Margaret showed them photos of her late husband and 5 grandchildren scattered across the country, Bradley gradually relaxed. "My youngest granddaughter is about to graduate from Northwestern," Margaret said proudly. "She's going to be a pediatric nurse. My firm manages the endowment for Northwestern's medical school," Bradley commented. "It's an excellent program." "Is that so? Well, perhaps you'd like to see Ellie's graduation photos from high school? She was valedictorian, you know." Without waiting for an answer, Margaret retrieved a photo album from the living room shelf. Walter watched as his son, who normally rushed through client meetings to maximize billable hours, spent 45 minutes looking through Margaret's family photos and listening to her stories. By the time they left, Bradley had promised to send Margaret information about a scholarship program at Northwestern that her granddaughter might qualify for. Their second visit was to Frank Donovan, the Vietnam veteran who needed the wheelchair ramp. Frank's situation was more challenging. His ranch-style home required significant modifications to accommodate his declining mobility, including widened doorways and a roll-in shower. The foundation had covered the $32,000 in renovations, transforming Frank's home into a space where he could maintain his independence. Frank greeted them in his wheelchair. A gruff but friendly man with tattoos covering his arms and a Marine Corps flag hanging prominently in his living room. Unlike Margaret's gentle approach, Frank was direct, immediately asking Bradley, "So you're Walter's son, the big-shot banker he talks about?" Bradley glanced at Walter in surprise. "Yes, I work in investment banking in Chicago." Frank nodded. Your dad says you're good at what you do. Also says you're too busy to visit much. Guess you proved him wrong today, huh? Bradley looked uncomfortable, but Frank didn't wait for a response. He led them through his modified home, showing how the renovations had changed his daily life. Before your dad's foundation stepped in, I was looking at a nursing home. Couldn't get my wheelchair through the bathroom door, couldn't reach half my kitchen cabinets. Now I can stay in my own house, on my own terms. As Frank spoke about his military service and his struggle with the VA system to get the benefits, he deserved, Walter noticed Bradley listening intently, occasionally asking insightful questions about Frank's experience with government assistance programs. Their final visit of the day was to the Martinez family, Elena and Victor, both in their 70s, who had needed emergency plumbing repairs after a pipe burst during the winter freeze. Their small house was filled with the sounds and smells of cooking when Walter and Bradley arrived, and Elena immediately insisted they stay for a late lunch. "Your father is an angel," Elena told Bradley as she served them homemade tamales. "When the pipe burst, water was everywhere. The plumber wanted $4,000 we didn't have. Victor was ready to take a loan against his life insurance." Victor, a retired factory worker with arthritis-gnarled hands, nodded solemnly. "We worked hard all our lives, never asked for handouts. But sometimes, life gives you challenges you can't overcome alone." As they ate, Bradley learned that Elena and Victor had raised 4 children and put them all through college by working multiple jobs and sacrificing their own comfort. Their children were now successful: a doctor, a teacher, an engineer, and a small business owner. But all lived far away and had their own families to support. "We don't blame them for not being able to help," Elena said firmly when Bradley asked if they'd reached out to their children about the plumbing emergency. "They send what they can, they visit when they can. We raised them to build their own lives, not to be our retirement plan." On the drive back to Walter's house, Bradley was uncharacteristically quiet. Walter let the silence stretch, allowing his son to process what he'd witnessed throughout the day. Finally, as they pulled into the driveway, Bradley spoke. "These people, they're all a lot like you, aren't they? Hardworking, independent, proud. People who never expected to need help in their later years." Walter nodded. "That's right. People who did everything society told them to do. Worked hard, saved what they could, raised their families, but still ended up vulnerable when unexpected expenses hit. And their children? Some seem involved, others not so much." After hanging up, Walter sat in his living room for a long time, watching the sunset through his window and contemplating this unexpected development. Was Bradley trying to fulfill the spirit of Walter's challenge while maintaining control? Or had something genuinely shifted in his son's perspective? The Thompson family arrived at Walter's house at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. This time, the atmosphere was markedly different from their Thanksgiving visit. Emma immediately gave Walter a long hug, while Jake proudly showed him a B+ he'd received on a science project about classic engines, inspired, he said, by the model car they'd built together. Melissa seemed warmer, too, complimenting Walter on his daffodils and mentioning that she'd brought a family photo album she thought he might enjoy seeing. Even Bradley appeared more relaxed, carrying bags into the house without commenting on its modest size or suggesting Walter consider selling it. After dinner, which Walter had prepared himself, Linda's famous lasagna recipe that had always been Bradley's favorite as a child, they gathered in the living room. Emma and Jake settled on the floor with a board game Walter had bought specifically for their visit, while the adults sat on the couches, making casual conversation about the unseasonably warm spring weather. Finally, Bradley cleared his throat. "Dad, there's something I'd like to discuss with you, with all of you, actually." He glanced at Melissa, who nodded encouragingly. "It's about your challenge, and about our family going forward." Walter nodded, noticing that even Emma and Jake had paused their game to listen. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since my last visit," Bradley continued. About your foundation, about the people you're helping, and about our relationship. He paused, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. The truth is, when you first told me about winning the lottery, my first thought was how it might benefit me and my family. I was calculating what share might come our way, what opportunities it might create for us. Melissa reached over and squeezed his hand supportively. When you presented your challenge instead, I was angry, Bradley admitted. I felt like you were judging me, testing me, maybe even punishing me for not being there when you needed help with the roof. That wasn't my intention, Walter said quietly. I know that now, Bradley replied. But it took me a while to see it. I spent weeks analyzing the financial aspects, trying to determine if the time investment would be worth it compared to the potential inheritance. Can you believe that? I was actually creating spreadsheets to calculate the hourly value of volunteering. With seniors. He shook his head in disgust at himself. What changed? Walter asked. Bradley looked at his children, then back at his father. A lot of things. Seeing the foundation's work firsthand. Hearing Emma talk about how much she values her relationship with you. Realizing that I've been teaching my children that money matters more than people. He took a deep breath. And remembering who I used to be before I got caught up in chasing success and status. So, what have you decided about the challenge? Walter asked, trying to keep his voice neutral despite the hope rising in his chest. Bradley smiled, a genuine smile that reminded Walter painfully of the boy who used to help him in the auto shop on weekends. I'm not accepting your challenge, Dad. Walter felt a stab of disappointment, but before he could respond, Bradley continued. I'm not accepting it because I don't need a financial incentive to do what I should have been doing all along. I don't want to volunteer with seniors for a year to earn $1 million. I want to reconnect with you, to be the son you deserve, because it's the right thing to do, not because there's money attached to it. The room fell silent. Walter felt his eyes grow moist. Bradley, let me finish, Dad. I've talked this over with Melissa, and we've made some decisions. First, I've established a corporate giving program at my firm to support senior assistance organizations, including your foundation. That's separate from anything between you and me. Walter nodded, remembering Diana's call. Second, I've reduced my work hours. I'm stepping back from some of my client responsibilities to make more time for my family. All my family, including you. Bradley glanced at Melissa, who smiled encouragingly. And third, we're looking at houses in Millfield. This caught Walter completely by surprise. Houses in Millfield? But your job, the children's schools? I can do most of my work remotely, Bradley explained. I'll commute to Chicago 2 days a week. As for the kids, Millfield has good schools. Different from their private school, but maybe that's not a bad thing. He looked at Emma and Jake. What do you two think about moving closer to Grandpa? Jake nodded enthusiastically. Can I help in your garage, Grandpa? Dad says you're teaching Marcus about cars. Emma was more measured, but smiled. I already researched Millfield High. Their debate team won regionals last year, and they have an environmental science program I'm interested in. Walter looked from his grandchildren to his son, hardly able to believe what he was hearing. Bradley, are you sure about this? It's a major life change. I've never been more sure of anything, Bradley replied. Dad, when I called you a burden, it was the worst thing I've ever said to anyone. I've been ashamed of it ever since, but too proud to admit it. The truth is, you've never been a burden. You've been the foundation that supported me my entire life. Now it's my turn to be there for you. Walter felt tears forming in his eyes. Son, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Dad, just tell me you'll let us be part of your life again. Not because of your lottery winnings, but because we're family. Walter stood and pulled Bradley into a hug. A real one this time, not the stiff, formal embrace they'd shared at Thanksgiving. After a moment, He felt smaller arms wrapping around both of them as Emma and Jake joined in, followed by Melissa. "Of course," Walter said when they finally separated. "Nothing would make me happier." Later that evening, after Emma and Jake had gone to bed, Walter, Bradley, and Melissa sat on the back porch, watching fireflies begin to appear in the April twilight. "There's something else I'd like to propose," Bradley said, his voice quiet in the gathering darkness. "About your foundation. I've been thinking about how to make it even more impactful." Walter raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening. What if we expanded its mission to include intergenerational programs? Projects that connect seniors with young people like Marcus? Mentorship, skill sharing, that kind of thing?" Walter nodded thoughtfully. "I like that idea. Many of the seniors I've met have incredible knowledge and skills, but no one to pass them on to. And kids like Marcus benefit from having additional adult mentors in their lives." "Exactly," Bradley agreed. "I've already discussed it with Diana. She thinks we could create a pilot program this summer. In fact," he hesitated, then continued, "I'd like to be actively involved in developing it. Not just writing checks, but helping design and implement the program." Walter smiled. "I think that would be wonderful, son." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the spring peepers calling from the small pond at the edge of Walter's property. Finally, Bradley spoke again, his voice reflective. "You know, Dad, when you first told me about winning the lottery, I thought it would change everything. And I guess it has, but not in the way I expected." "How so?" Walter asked. "I thought it was about the money, what it could buy, how it could make life easier. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was what you chose to do with it." Bradley looked at his father with newfound respect. "You could have bought a mansion, traveled the world, lived like a king. Instead, you used your windfall to help others and to try to heal our family." Walter shrugged. "Money is just a tool, Bradley. It's how you use it that defines you." "I'm beginning to understand that," Bradley admitted. "And I want Emma and Jake to understand it too. That's another reason we want to move to Millfield, so they can see the foundation's work firsthand. Maybe even get involved when they're ready." The conversation drifted to practical matters. Houses for sale in Millfield, schools for the children, how often Bradley would need to be in Chicago. As they talked, Walter felt a deep sense of peace settling over him. His lottery winnings had indeed changed everything, but not through the money itself. Rather, it had created an opportunity for truth, reflection, and reconciliation. By Walter's birthday in May, the original deadline for Bradley's decision about the challenge, the Thompson family had undergone a transformation. Bradley and Melissa had purchased a house just 3 blocks from Walter's, with plans to move in by the end of June when the children's school year ended. Bradley had already begun working with Diana to develop the intergenerational program for the foundation, bringing his financial expertise and business connections to complement Walter's community knowledge. Emma and Jake visited their grandfather every weekend, with Emma joining Walter at foundation events, and Jake continuing to learn about cars in Walter's garage. Melissa, who had initially seemed the most reluctant about the move, had discovered a talent for grant writing and was helping the foundation apply for additional funding to expand its programs. On the evening of Walter's birthday, the family gathered in his backyard for a barbecue. Friends from Millfield were there. Margaret Wilson arrived with her famous potato salad. Frank Donovan came in his wheelchair with a bottle of bourbon for the birthday boy, and the Martinez family brought enough homemade tamales to feed everyone. Twice over. Marcus and his parents were invited too, with Walter quietly arranging for Marcus's father to meet several local business owners who might be looking for experienced factory workers. As dusk fell, Bradley tapped a fork against his glass, calling for everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast to my father," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Not just because it's his birthday, but because he taught me the most valuable lesson of my life this year." The gathering quieted, all eyes turning to Bradley. 6. Months ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. When my father needed help, I turned my back on him. I called him a burden. Bradley's voice caught slightly, but he continued. What I didn't understand then, what he helped me see, is that family is never a burden. It's a privilege, a gift. Walter felt his eyes growing moist as Bradley continued. My father could have written me off. He had every right to. Instead, he gave me the chance to remember who I really am and what truly matters. Bradley raised his glass higher. So here's to Walter Thompson, mechanic, father, grandfather, and the wisest man I know. Thank you, Dad, for not giving up on me even when I gave up on you. To Walter, the guests echoed, raising their glasses. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, Walter found himself alone with Bradley on the back porch, just as they had been that night in April when everything began to change. You know, I never did tell you what I planned to do with that $1 million if you'd accepted the challenge, Walter said. Bradley looked curious. What would you have done with it? Walter smiled. Exactly what I'm going to do anyway. Put it in trust for Emma and Jake's education and for any other grandchildren that might come along in the future. Bradley laughed softly. So in the end, the money was always headed back to my family? Of course, Walter replied. But now it comes without conditions, without tests. Just my love, which was always there, even when you couldn't see it. Bradley was quiet for a moment. You know, when you first won the lottery and told me your plans, I was speechless, partly with shock, partly with disappointment that there wasn't a big inheritance coming my way. And now? Walter asked. Bradley looked out at the yard where Melissa was helping Jake collect fireflies in a jar, while Emma chatted animatedly with Margaret Wilson about her upcoming visit to her granddaughter's college graduation. Now I'm speechless for an entirely different reason, Bradley said softly, because I almost lost all of this. Not the money, but the connection, the belonging, the chance to be part of something meaningful. He turned to his father with genuine gratitude in his eyes. Thanks to you, I got a second chance to get it right. Walter put his arm around his son's shoulders, feeling truly wealthy for the first time since his lottery win. That's the thing about second chances, son. They're worth more than all the money in the world. 2 years later, the autumn leaves crunched beneath Walter's boots as he made his way down Millfield's main street. At 70, his pace had slowed, somewhat, but he still walked with purpose, stopping occasionally to greet townspeople by name. Many called out to him as he passed. Not because he was a lottery winner. Most of Millfield still had no idea about that. But because he had become such a fixture in the community. The storefront that housed the Walter Thompson Family Foundation had expanded in the past 2 years, taking over the vacant space next door to accommodate its growing staff and programs. The simple sign above the door now featured a tagline, Bridging Generations, Building Community. Walter paused to look through the large front window, pride swelling in his chest at the scene inside. The main room had been converted into a combination workshop and classroom, with workbenches along one wall and comfortable seating areas scattered throughout. Today, Frank Donovan was at the central table in his wheelchair, surrounded by 5 teenagers including Marcus, who was now in his first year at technical college. Frank was demonstrating how to disassemble and clean a carburetor, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision, despite his other physical limitations. In another corner, Elena Martinez sat with a group of younger children, teaching them to make traditional Mexican paper flowers while speaking a mix of Spanish and English. The intergenerational program Bradley had proposed had expanded beyond its initial concept, becoming a thriving community hub where seniors shared their knowledge and skills with young people, and young people offered companionship and technological assistance to seniors. Walter checked his watch and continued down the street. He was due at Bradley and Melissa's house for Sunday dinner. a weekly tradition that had become the anchor of his life since his son's family had moved to Millfield. As he turned onto Maple Avenue, he reflected on how much had changed in the 2 years since his lottery win. Bradley had kept his promise to scale back his work hours, now spending only 2 days a week in Chicago. The remaining time he divided between remote work, family, and the foundation, where he had taken on the role of financial director. Under his guidance, the foundation had established partnerships with several large corporations and expanded its reach to neighboring towns. Melissa had discovered an unexpected passion for community work. After helping with grant writing, she had gone on to develop a specialized program within the foundation focused on elderly healthcare navigation, helping seniors understand their medical benefits, connect with specialists, and advocate for themselves in an increasingly complex healthcare system. Emma, now 16, had indeed joined Millfield High's debate team and was already being scouted by college recruiters impressed with her eloquence and passion for social issues. Jake, at 12, had become Walter's constant shadow in the garage, showing such natural talent for mechanics that Walter had begun teaching him increasingly complex repairs. Walter reached Bradley and Melissa's house, a charming 4-bedroom Victorian just 3 blocks from his own home. Unlike the luxury high-rise in Chicago, this house had a wide front porch with rocking chairs, a basketball hoop in the driveway, and a yard where Jake could practice pitching with his Little League team. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was warm and welcoming, a real home rather than a status symbol. Before Walter could knock, the front door swung open and Jake barreled out, nearly knocking him over with an enthusiastic hug. "Grandpa, you're right on time. Dad's making his famous chili, and I helped with the cornbread." Walter laughed, ruffling his grandson's hair. "Well, that sounds like a feast fit for a king." Inside, the house bustled with activity. Bradley stood at the stove stirring a massive pot, an apron tied around his waist, something Walter would never have imagined seeing 2 years ago. Melissa and Emma were setting the dining room table, debating the merits of different colleges Emma was considering applying to. The scene was so far removed from the stilted, formal Thanksgiving gathering of 2 years ago that it almost seemed like a different family entirely. "Dad!" Bradley called out, smiling broadly. "Perfect timing. Grab yourself a drink and come taste this chili. I think I finally got Mom's recipe right." Dinner was a lively affair, with conversation flowing easily between topics. Emma's latest debate victory, Jake's science project on alternative energy, Melissa's new healthcare navigation program, Bradley's upcoming presentation to potential corporate sponsors. Walter mostly listened, basking in the warmth of family connection that had once seemed irretrievably lost. After the meal, as Emma and Jake cleared the dishes, Bradley motioned for Walter to join him in his home office. Melissa followed, closing the door behind them with a knowing smile. "Dad, we wanted to talk to you about something important," Bradley began, gesturing for Walter to take a seat in one of the comfortable leather armchairs. "Is everything okay?" Walter asked, suddenly concerned. "Everything's fine," Melissa assured him. "Better than fine, actually." Bradley nodded, opening a folder on his desk. "We've been working on something for the past few months, a new initiative for the foundation. We wanted to get all the details worked out before presenting it to you." Walter leaned forward with interest. "What kind of initiative?" "We're calling it the Second Chance Housing Program," Bradley explained, passing Walter a professionally designed brochure. "It's aimed at helping seniors who are at risk of losing their homes due to financial hardship, health issues, or family circumstances." Walter flipped through the brochure, impressed by the detailed program description. The initiative would provide emergency funds for home repairs, similar to the foundation's original mission, but would also offer legal assistance for seniors facing foreclosure, financial counseling, and in some cases, help with relocating to more suitable housing while maintaining their independence. "This looks comprehensive," Walter remarked. "What inspired it?" Bradley and Melissa exchanged glances. "You did, Dad." Bradley said softly. 2 years ago, when you needed help with your roof, you shouldn't have had to choose between asking your son for money or potentially losing your home. No senior should face that choice. We've been tracking the cases the foundation has handled over the past 2 years, Melissa added. Housing insecurity is the most common issue seniors in our community face, and it's often what leads to loss of independence. Walter nodded thoughtfully. I like it. But this would require significant funding, wouldn't it? Bradley smiled. That's the other part we wanted to discuss. I've secured commitments from 3 major corporate partners who are willing to match donations up to a total of $3 million annually. And he hesitated, looking at Melissa, who nodded encouragingly. Melissa and I would like to personally commit $500,000 from our savings to help launch the program. Walter blinked in surprise. That's a substantial commitment. It is, Bradley agreed. But we've been thinking a lot about legacy, about what we want Emma and Jake to inherit from us. Not just money, but values. The example we set. He looked directly at his father. You taught me that, Dad, when you chose to use your lottery winnings to help others and heal our family rather than simply living a life of luxury. We want our children to understand that wealth brings responsibility, Melissa added. That true security comes from being part of a community that supports each other, not from having the biggest house or the most expensive car. Walter felt a lump forming in his throat. 2 years ago, his son had called him a burden when he'd asked for help with a leaking roof. Now that same son was committing $500,000 to ensure other seniors wouldn't face similar rejection. I don't know what to say, Walter admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Say you'll chair the advisory committee, Bradley suggested. We need someone who understands firsthand what it means to feel vulnerable in your own home, to fear losing, the place that holds all your memories. Walter nodded slowly. I'd be honored. As they rejoined the family in the living room, Walter found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. His lottery win had been the catalyst, but the true transformation had come from the choices made afterward. His decision to establish the foundation and challenge his son, Bradley's decision to reconnect with his family values, and their collective decision to use their resources to strengthen their community. The following Saturday morning found Walter back at the foundation headquarters, this time in the conference room with Bradley, Diana, and several board members. They were reviewing the plans for the Second Chance housing program, discussing implementation timelines and staffing needs. We should be ready to launch by January, Diana concluded, making a note on her tablet. Assuming the corporate funding comes through as promised. It will, Bradley assured her. I've got firm commitments from all 3 partners. They're excited about the PR opportunities, of course, but they're also genuinely interested in the social impact. As the meeting wrapped up, Walter noticed Frank Donovan wheeling himself toward the conference room. The Vietnam veteran had become a regular fixture at the foundation, not just as a skills instructor, but as an informal advisor who never hesitated to speak his mind. Meeting over? Frank asked, peering through the doorway. Good, because there's someone here you all should meet. He backed his wheelchair up to make way for a middle-aged woman who stepped hesitantly into the room. She appeared to be in her 50s, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and a nervous expression on her face. This is Patty Reynolds, Frank introduced her. She lives over on Cedar Street in that little yellow house with the picket fence. Patty, this is Walter Thompson and his son Bradley. They run this place. Walter stood and extended his hand. It's nice to meet you, Patty. What brings you to the foundation today? Patty shook his hand briefly, her own hand trembling slightly. Frank suggested I come. I'm in a bit of a situation with my mom, Gloria. She's 86 and has been living with me since my dad passed 5 years ago. But I just lost my job at the textile factory, and I can't keep up with both the mortgage and her medical expenses. The bank is threatening foreclosure, and the nursing homes I've looked at are way beyond what we can afford. Walter and Bradley exchanged glances. It was exactly the kind of situation their new program was designed to address. "You've come to the right place, Patty," Bradley said warmly. "We're actually launching a new program that might be able to help. Why don't we sit down and talk through your options?" For the next hour, they listened to Patty's story. Her mother had worked as a teacher for 40 years in Millfield, while her father had been a postal carrier. They had saved modestly for retirement, but a series of strokes had depleted their savings through medical bills and needed home modifications. Patty had taken her mother in without hesitation, but now with her own financial crisis, she was facing impossible choices. "I promised Mom she'd never end up in a nursing home," Patty said, wiping away tears. "She took care of me my whole life. I can't let her down now that she needs me, but I don't know how to keep that promise anymore." Walter reached across the table and patted her hand gently. "Family takes care of family, Patty. That's as it should be. But sometimes, families need a bit of support to make that possible." "Our new program isn't officially launched yet," Bradley explained, "but your situation is exactly what it's designed for. We might be able to help you negotiate with your bank to modify your mortgage, provide emergency funds to cover immediate expenses, and connect you with resources for your mother's care that would allow her to stay with you." Patty looked from Walter to Bradley with cautious hope. "Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us." Frank snorted from his place by the door. "That's not how these Thompsons operate, Patty. They help because they can, because they understand what it means to face tough times, and because they believe nobody should have to choose between a roof over their head and taking care of family." Walter smiled at Frank's succinct assessment. "He's right. 2 years ago, I was in a situation not so different from yours. My roof was leaking. I couldn't afford repairs, and I had to ask for help. It wasn't easy." "What happened?" Patty asked. Walter glanced at Bradley, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Let's just say it led to some difficult moments, but ultimately to something beautiful. It helped me and my son understand what truly matters." By the time Patty left an hour later, she had an appointment with Diana to begin the formal assistance process, temporary emergency funds to cover her next mortgage payment, and something she hadn't had when she arrived: hope. As Walter walked her to the door, Patty turned to him impulsively. "Mr. Thompson, I don't know how to thank you and your son. When Frank suggested I come here, I was desperate, but I never expected this." Walter smiled. "Just take good care of your mother, Patty, and when you're back on your feet, maybe you'll find a way to help someone else who's struggling." After she left, Walter found Bradley watching him with a thoughtful expression. "What?" Walter asked. "I was just thinking about ripples," Bradley replied. "How one action leads to another, then another. If you hadn't won the lottery, if you hadn't challenged me instead of just giving me money, if I hadn't eventually seen the light, Patty and her mother might have lost their home." Walter nodded. "Life has a way of connecting dots we can't even see at the time." "You know what else I realized?" Bradley continued. "When I called you a burden 2 years ago, it was the worst thing I could have said. But in a strange way, it led to all of this." He gestured around at the Foundation headquarters. "Sometimes our worst moments can lead to our best, if we're willing to learn from them." As they walked out of the Foundation building together into the bright autumn afternoon, Walter reflected on his son's words. The lottery win had changed their lives, certainly, but not in the way either of them could have predicted. The money itself had been merely a tool, a catalyst for the real wealth they had discovered: reconciliation, purpose, and the joy of helping others. "Dad," Bradley said as they paused on the sidewalk, "remember when I told you I was speechless? After you revealed your lottery win and your plans for the money?" Walter nodded, smiling at the memory. "You said you were speechless then out of shock and disappointment, but later speechless for better reasons." "Well, I'm speechless again today," Bradley admitted. Watching you with Patty, seeing how naturally you connected with her, understood her fear of letting down someone she loves, it reminded me of how I almost let you down." He shook his head in wonder. "I can't believe how close I came to missing all of this, to staying the person I was 2 years ago." Walter put his arm around his son's shoulders as they walked toward Bradley's house, where Melissa was hosting a barbecue for Foundation volunteers. "The best kind of wealth," Walter said, "is the kind that grows when you share it. Not just money, but time, knowledge, compassion." He looked at his son with pride. "Linda would be so proud of the man you've become." As they approached Bradley's house, they could see the backyard filled with people: Foundation staff, volunteers, program participants, neighbors. Emma was deep in conversation with Patty Reynolds, likely hearing her story firsthand. Jake was helping Marcus set up a volleyball net. Melissa was arranging food on outdoor tables with Elena Martinez's help. It was a community, one that had formed organically around the simple principle that people matter more than money, that family extends beyond blood relations, and that no one should be considered just a burden. Walter paused at the gate, taking in the scene. From a leaking roof and a painful rejection to this moment of connection and purpose, it had been quite a journey. The lottery winnings that had started it all now seemed almost incidental to the true riches that surrounded him. "Coming, Dad?" Bradley asked, holding the gate open. Walter smiled. "Yes, son, I'm right behind you." 5 years later, the banquet hall of the Millfield Community Center was filled to capacity, decorated with elegant blue and silver streamers for the occasion. A banner stretched across the front wall reading, "The Walter Thompson Family Foundation, 5 years of building bridges." Round tables dotted the space, each adorned with simple centerpieces of local wildflowers. Walter, now 73, stood at the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. Despite his age, he stood tall and straight, his eyes bright with the vitality that comes from purpose rather than years. He wore a new blue suit. Bradley had insisted on taking him to a proper tailor in Chicago for the occasion, but his weathered hands and the practical shoes beneath the suit trousers betrayed his lifelong identity as a working man. "Mr. Thompson, congratulations on this milestone," said Mayor Caroline Foster as she shook his hand. "What your foundation has accomplished in 5 years is nothing short of remarkable." Walter smiled modestly. "It's been a community effort, Mayor. I just had the good fortune to be able to get it started." The good fortune he referred to, his lottery win, had remained largely unknown in Millfield. Only a handful of people were aware that the foundation had begun with Walter's winnings. Most believed it had started as a small family initiative that had grown through corporate partnerships, which was partially true. Walter preferred it that way. He'd never wanted to be known as the lottery winner, but rather for the work the foundation accomplished. As more guests arrived, Walter watched with pride as Bradley worked the room. His son, now in his mid-40s, had a natural ease with people that Walter had never possessed himself. Bradley moved from table to table, thanking donors, community partners, and program participants with genuine warmth. He'd kept his promise to scale back his investment banking career, now working primarily as the foundation's executive director, while maintaining a small client list in Chicago. Melissa stood near the podium, reviewing her notes for the evening's presentation. She had blossomed in her role as Healthcare Navigation Program Director, becoming a respected advocate for senior healthcare rights at both the local and state level. Her program had helped hundreds of seniors access the care they needed while maintaining their dignity and autonomy. Emma, now 21 and home from her junior year at Northwestern University, was helping with the multimedia presentation that would showcase the foundation's accomplishments. She'd inherited Walter's practical nature and Bradley's financial acumen, but had developed her own distinct passion for public policy. Her summer internships with the foundation had inspired her thesis on intergenerational support programs as a model for community-based welfare alternatives. Jake, 17 and tall like his father, moved among the tables with a stack of programs, distributing them to guests with an easy confidence. The shy 10-year-old who had once bonded with Walter over model cars was now headed to technical college in the fall, having discovered a passion for sustainable engineering through his work with the Foundation's vocational mentorship program. Walter moved to the side of the room as the space filled with familiar faces: Foundation staff, program beneficiaries, community partners, and volunteers. Frank Donovan wheeled himself in, now sporting a full white beard but still with the same military posture. The Martinez family arrived together, Elena and Victor moving more slowly now, but still independent thanks to ongoing support from the Foundation's home modification program. Margaret Wilson came with her granddaughter Ellie, now a practicing pediatric nurse who volunteered her time at the Foundation's healthcare clinics. Marcus, who had graduated from technical college and now owned his own auto repair shop in Millfield, arrived with his parents. His father, who had found employment through Walter's quiet networking years ago, now served on the Foundation's Vocational Training Advisory Board. Patty Reynolds, whose home had been saved by the Second Chance housing program in its early days, now worked for the Foundation helping other families navigate similar circumstances. Among the newer faces were representatives from the three major corporate partners that had helped expand the Foundation's work, state lawmakers interested in replicating the Foundation's programs in other communities, and journalists from several regional publications. As people found their seats, Walter made his way to the head table where his family waited. Seeing them together, Bradley, Melissa, Emma, and Jake, still gave him a surge of gratitude that sometimes overwhelmed him. 7 years ago, he had been a lonely widower with a leaking roof and a distant son who considered him just a burden. Now he sat at the center of not just a reconciled family, but an extended community that had grown around the Foundation's simple mission: to ensure that no one, especially the elderly, would face life's challenges alone. Diana Cortez, the attorney, who had helped Walter establish the Foundation, tapped the microphone to signal the beginning of the evening's program. As conversation quieted, Walter felt Bradley's hand on his shoulder. "Ready for this, Dad?" Bradley asked quietly. Walter nodded, though in truth he felt somewhat anxious. Public speaking had never been his strength, but tonight he would need to address the gathering briefly. Bradley had suggested he simply speak from the heart, rather than trying to memorize a formal speech. Diana welcomed the attendees and provided a brief overview of the Foundation's history, carefully omitting any mention of Walter's lottery win at his request. She then introduced a short video showcasing the Foundation's various programs and their impact on the community. The video opened with before and after images of homes repaired through the original program, then expanded to show the intergenerational skill-sharing workshops, the healthcare navigation service, the Second Chance housing program, and the vocational scholarships. Testimonials from program participants were interspersed throughout, including one from Frank Donovan that brought tears to several eyes in the room. "Before the Foundation, I was just waiting to die," Frank said bluntly in his video segment. "Now I've got purpose again. These kids I teach, they keep me sharp, give me a reason to get up in the morning. And I like to think I'm leaving something behind, passing on what I know before I go." As the video concluded, Diana introduced Melissa to present the Foundation's 5-year impact report. With professional poise, Melissa walked the audience through the impressive statistics: 247 homes repaired or modified, 192 seniors assisted with healthcare navigation, 35 families saved from foreclosure through the Second Chance housing program, 28 vocational scholarships awarded, and countless intergenerational connections forged through the Foundation's various workshops and events. But numbers only tell part of the story, Melissa concluded. The true impact of the Foundation isn't in statistics, but in the dignity restored, the independence preserved, and the isolation ended for hundreds of seniors in our community. And equally important is the impact on younger generations who have gained not just practical skills, but a deeper understanding of their connection to those who came before them. Next came Bradley's portion of the program. He spoke about the foundation's financial sustainability, the corporate partnerships that had expanded its reach, and the plans for the future, including a new initiative to address transportation, challenges for seniors in rural areas surrounding Millfield. "When we began this journey 5 years ago," Bradley said, "we could never have imagined how it would grow. What started as a family's attempt to heal its own wounds has become a model for community-based senior support that others are now seeking to replicate across the state." He paused, his eyes finding Walter in the audience. "None of this would have been possible without the vision and heart of one man, my father, Walter Thompson." Bradley extended his hand toward Walter, inviting him to the podium. As Walter made his way to the front of the room, the audience rose in a standing ovation, their applause washing over him in a wave of appreciation he had never sought, but which moved him deeply nonetheless. When he reached the microphone, Walter waited for the applause to subside, then cleared his throat nervously. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I spent 40 years of my life working under the hoods of cars, not talking to crowds. But I want to thank all of you for being here tonight and for being part of this foundation story." He paused, gathering his thoughts. 7 years ago, my roof was leaking. That might seem like a small problem to some, but when you're living on Social Security and your savings are running low, a leaking roof can mean the difference between staying in your home or losing it. I found myself in a position I never thought I'd be in, having to ask for help. Walter glanced at Bradley, who nodded encouragingly. The response I received— Walter paused, careful not to embarrass his son by being too specific, made me realize how vulnerable seniors can become, how quickly we can go from being respected to being viewed as burdens. But it also set in motion a chain of events that led to this room tonight, to all of you, to this foundation. Walter looked out at the audience, recognizing so many faces of people whose lives had intersected with his through the Foundation's work. "What I've learned over these past 5 years is that none of us is truly independent. We need each other, across generations, across economic circumstances, across all the divisions that sometimes separate us. The young need the wisdom and experience of the old need the energy and support of the young. And we all need to know that when hard times come, we won't face them alone." Walter gestured to the people in the room. "This foundation isn't really about fixing roofs or navigating healthcare systems, though we do those things. It's about recognizing the inherent dignity in every person, regardless of age or circumstance. It's about honoring the contributions of those who built our community and ensuring they can live out their years with respect and purpose. And it's about teaching younger generations that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in relationships, in belonging, in knowing that you matter to others." He turned slightly to look at his family seated at the head table. "I'm grateful beyond words for my son Bradley, who took a challenging situation and transformed it into an opportunity for growth. For my daughter-in-law Melissa, whose compassion and organizational skills have made our healthcare program a model for others. For my grandchildren, Emma and Jake, who represent the future I always hoped for. Young people who understand that their lives are connected to those who came before and those who will come after." Walter's voice caught slightly, and he paused, to regain his composure. "My late wife Linda used to say that family isn't about obligation, it's about connection. I think the same is true of community. We help each other not because we have to, but because in that connection we find meaning. That's what this foundation has tried to foster. Meaningful connections that enrich all our lives." As Walter concluded his remarks, the audience once again rose in applause. Bradley joined him at the podium, embracing his father as camera flashes captured the moment. The remainder of the evening unfolded with dinner, music from a local high school jazz band, and plenty of conversation as people mingled between tables. Walter found himself approached repeatedly by guests wanting to share their personal stories of how the foundation had touched their lives or the lives of their loved ones. Later, as the event wound down and staff began clearing tables, Walter stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The spring evening was mild, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. He sat on a bench outside the community center, breathing in the familiar scents of Millfield, freshly cut grass, the distant aroma of the bakery on Main Street, the subtle fragrance of lilacs blooming in the nearby park. The door opened behind him, and Walter turned to see Bradley approaching. "There you are," his son said, sitting down beside him. "I wondered where you'd disappeared to." "Just needed a moment to take it all in," Walter replied. "It was quite an evening," Bradley nodded. "It was. You know, the mayor mentioned something interesting to me just now. Apparently, there's talk at the state level about using our foundation as a model for a pilot program in other communities. They're impressed with our results, especially the cost-effectiveness compared to traditional senior service models." "Is that right?" Walter said, genuinely surprised. "From a leaking roof to a state program. Who would have thought?" They sat, in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the last traces of sunset faded from the horizon. "Dad," Bradley said finally, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you for a while now." "What's that, son?" "Do you ever regret winning the lottery?" Walter looked at his son in surprise. "Regret it? Why would I regret it?" Bradley shrugged. "Sometimes I wonder if it complicates your life in ways you never wanted. All the responsibility of the foundation, the public attention, the constant decisions about programs and funding. It's a lot for someone who always lived a pretty private life." Walter considered the question thoughtfully. "I don't regret winning, no. But I do sometimes think about how differently things might have gone if I'd made different choices with the money." "What do you mean?" "Well," Walter said, "I could have just fixed my roof, bought a nicer house, traveled a bit, and lived out my days in comfortable obscurity. That would have been the easier path, certainly." "But not the better one?" Bradley asked. Walter shook his head. "Not for me. The money itself was never going to make me happy, Bradley. What's made these last years meaningful is exactly what I talked about in there. The connections, the purpose, seeing the impact we've had on people's lives." He looked directly at his son. "And most importantly, rebuilding our family. If it took a lottery win to make that happen, then it was the best luck I ever had." Bradley nodded slowly. "You know, I've never told you this, but after Thanksgiving when you told me about the lottery and your challenge, I was angry for weeks. I thought you were punishing me, trying to control me through money. And now? Now, I understand it was the most generous thing anyone has ever done for me," Bradley admitted. "You could have cut me off completely after what I said to you. Instead, you found a way to help me remember who I really was beneath all the ambition and materialism. You gave me the chance to become someone I could be proud of." Walter smiled. "You did the hard work yourself, son. I just provided the opportunity." "Either way," Bradley said, "I'm grateful. And I want you to know that no matter what else this foundation accomplishes, whether it stays a local organization or becomes the model for programs across the country, its greatest success will always be what it did for our family." From inside the community center, they heard Jake calling for them. "Dad! Grandpa! Mom says it's time for the final photos." Bradley stood and offered his hand to his father. "Shall we?" Walter took his son's hand and rose from the bench. As they walked back toward the building, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a painful rejection to a healing reconciliation. From a leaking roof to a thriving foundation that had touched hundreds of lives. 7. Years ago, when his son had called him just a burden and refused to help with his roof, Walter could never have imagined that his lottery winnings would lead to this. Not just a repaired roof, but a rebuilt family. Not just financial security, but profound purpose. Not just his own needs met, but a legacy that would continue to meet the needs of others long after he was gone. As Walter rejoined his family for the photographs that would commemorate this milestone, he knew that the true wealth in his life had nothing to do with the numbers in his bank account. It was right here, in the son who had found his way back to his core values, in the daughter-in-law who had discovered her passion for service, in the grandchildren who were growing into compassionate, purposeful adults, and in the community that had formed around them all. Bradley had been speechless when Walter revealed his lottery win and subsequent plans. Now, years later, it was Walter who sometimes found himself without words to express the gratitude he felt for how it had all unfolded, how a moment of crisis had become the catalyst for the richest chapter of his life. 10 years later, the afternoon. Sun cast long shadows across Millfield Cemetery as a small gathering of people stood around a simple but elegant headstone. The marker read, Walter Thompson, 1956-2033, beloved father, grandfather, and friend. His legacy lives on in all he touched. Bradley Thompson, now in his early 50s with silver threading through his dark hair, stood with his arm around Melissa. At 51, she remained elegant, though grief had etched new lines around her eyes. Emma, 26 and recently married, stood beside her husband, Michael, a fellow Northwestern graduate she'd met during her master's program in public policy. Jake, 22, stood tall in his dress uniform. He had surprised everyone by enlisting in the Marine Corps after technical college, inspired by the veterans he'd met through the foundation. It had been 3 months since Walter's passing, peaceful, in his sleep after a brief illness, but today was special. The board of the Walter Thompson Family Foundation had gathered to dedicate a memorial bench at his gravesite and to make an important announcement about the foundation's future. Diana Cortez, now in her 60s but still sharp as ever, stepped forward to address the small crowd of board members, foundation staff, and close friends. Walter Thompson never sought recognition, she began, her voice strong despite the emotion of the moment. He established the foundation not for acclaim, but because he recognized a need in his community and had the means to address it. Over the past decade, what began as one man's response to a personal situation has grown into something none of us could have anticipated. She gestured to the simple wooden bench, now installed near Walter's grave, crafted by students in the Foundation's vocational training program, using reclaimed wood from old barns in the county. This bench represents Walter's philosophy perfectly, Diana continued, taking something with history and giving it a new purpose, creating a place of rest and reflection, crafted by young hands guided by experienced ones, simple, functional, and built to last. Bradley stepped forward next, placing a hand on the bench as he addressed the gathering. My father was a mechanic by trade, he said. He understood that sometimes the most important things aren't flashy or new. They're the foundations, the connections, the parts that hold everything together. He applied that understanding not just to cars, but to the community. Bradley paused, visibly collecting himself before continuing. Today, as we dedicate this bench to his memory, we're also announcing a significant evolution for the foundation. The Walter Thompson Family Foundation has been selected by the state to lead a pilot program expanding our model to 5 additional counties. With matching funds from the state and our corporate partners, we'll be able to help thousands more. Seniors maintain their independence and dignity while creating meaningful intergenerational connections. A murmur of appreciation ran through the gathered crowd. Frank Donovan, now in his 80s and still feisty despite increasing health challenges, called out from his wheelchair. Walter would have hated all this attention but loved the work. Get on with it. The group laughed, the tension of grief momentarily broken by Frank's characteristic bluntness. As the formal dedication concluded and people began to disperse, several lingered to share memories of Walter. Marcus, now a successful business owner, with 3 auto shops across the county, recalled how Walter had taught him to rebuild an engine when he was just a teenager. Patty Reynolds, whose home had been saved by the foundation years ago, brought flowers from her garden, Her mother, Gloria, had passed on, but Patty had been able to care for her at home until the end, just as she'd promised. Elena Martinez, now widowed but still active in the Foundation's Cultural Heritage Program, brought traditional Mexican cookies she'd baked using her grandmother's recipe, the same ones she now taught young people to make in the Foundation's intergenerational cooking classes. As the gathering gradually thinned, Bradley found himself alone at the bench with Emma and Jake. Melissa had stepped away to help Diana coordinate the reception that would follow at the Foundation headquarters. "It still doesn't seem real," Jake said, running his hand along the smooth wood of the bench. "I keep expecting Grandpa to call and ask if I want to come over to work on that '67 Impala." The Impala, Walter's prized possession that he'd once considered selling to pay for his roof repairs, had become a years-long restoration project for him and Jake. They'd finally completed it just months before Walter's passing, and it now sat in Jake's garage, a tangible connection to his grandfather. "No," Emma agreed. "I was working on the state proposal last week and caught myself making notes to ask Grandpa about the healthcare navigation component. It's like my brain hasn't accepted that I can't just pick up the phone and call him anymore." Bradley sat down, on the bench, feeling the solid craftsmanship beneath him. "You know what your grandfather told me once? He said that the people we love are never really gone as long as we continue their work, their values, their way of seeing the world. I think that's especially true with Dad. He's present in everything the Foundation does, in the lives it changes." Three sat in companionable silence for a moment, each lost in their own memories of Walter. "Dad," Emma said eventually, "there's something Jake and I wanted to talk to you about, something we've been discussing since before Grandpa passed." Bradley looked at his children, noting the serious expressions on their faces. "What is it?" Jake glanced at Emma, who nodded for him to continue. "We want to establish a new program, through the Foundation. We're calling it the Walter Thompson Legacy Grant. The idea," Emma explained, "is to identify seniors in financial distress who have been estranged from their families, particularly those whose adult children have withdrawn support or contact. The grant would provide immediate financial assistance for critical needs, but more importantly, it would include family mediation services. The goal isn't just to fix their roofs or furnaces," Jake added, "but to try to heal the family rifts that have left them vulnerable in the first place. To interrupt the cycle where seniors end up isolated from the very people who should be their support system." Bradley felt a tightness in his chest as he realized what his children were proposing, a program directly inspired by the situation that had once existed between him and Walter, before the lottery, before the Foundation, before their reconciliation. That would be remarkable," he managed to say. "But it's also incredibly challenging work. Family estrangements have complex causes." Emma nodded. "We know. That's why we've been researching family reconciliation programs and talking with professionals in the field. We think with the right approach and the right team, we could make a real difference. Not for everyone, certainly, but for some families caught in patterns they don't know how to break." "We wanted to call it Just a Burden No More," Jake admitted. But Emma thought that might be too on the nose. Bradley winced at hearing his own terrible words from a decade ago. She was right about that. "The thing is, Dad," Emma said gently, "Grandpa told us, not all at once but in bits and pieces over the years, about how things were between you two before the lottery, about what you said when he asked for help with the roof, and about how he decided to use his winnings to give you a chance to reconnect with your better self." Bradley looked down at his hands. "He told you that?" Jake nodded. "He wasn't trying to make you look bad. Actually, it was the opposite. He used to tell us that the measure of a person isn't that they never make mistakes, but how they respond when those mistakes are revealed to them. He was proud of you, Dad. Proud of the choice you made when given the opportunity to change course." Bradley felt tears welling in his eyes. "Your grandfather was a wise man." "So," Emma said. What do you think of our idea? Would you support adding this program to the Foundation's work? Bradley looked at his children. These remarkable adults who had absorbed the best of Walter's values and were now seeking to extend his legacy in ways he might never have imagined. The Foundation had already expanded beyond its original mission of home repairs for seniors to include healthcare navigation, vocational training, intergenerational skill sharing, and cultural heritage preservation. This new initiative would touch on something even more fundamental: the family connections that, when broken, often created the very vulnerabilities the other programs addressed. I think, Bradley said finally, that your grandfather would consider this the most important work the Foundation could possibly do. That evening, following the reception at the Foundation headquarters, Bradley returned home alone. Melissa had stayed behind to finish some work, and Emma and Jake had gone out to dinner with friends who had traveled for the dedication. The house felt unusually quiet as Bradley made his way to his home office. Sitting at his desk, he unlocked the bottom drawer and removed a worn envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, the last communication he had received from his father. Walter had given it to Diana with instructions to deliver it to Bradley after his passing. Bradley had read it dozens of times in the 3 months since Walter's death, but tonight, after the dedication and his conversation with Emma and Jake, he felt compelled to read it again. Bradley, if you're reading this, then I've moved on to whatever comes next. Don't grieve too much. I've had a good life, especially these last 10 years. They've been the richest of my existence, not because of the lottery money, but because of what came from it. Our reconciliation, the Foundation's work, watching Emma and Jake grow into the fine people they've become. I never told you this, but the day I won the lottery wasn't actually the luckiest day of my life. That came later, when you decided to look beyond your initial disappointment and resentment, when you chose to see the challenge I offered not as a punishment, but as an opportunity, when you chose to reconnect with the values your mother and I had tried to instill in you. I want you to know that I never held your initial reaction against you. We all lose our way sometimes. The important thing is finding our way back. You did that, and in doing so, you gave me the greatest gift of my life. Not just a son who called regularly or visited on holidays, but a true partner in building something meaningful, something that will outlast both of us. The Foundation is your responsibility now. I trust you to guide it with the same wisdom and compassion you've shown these past years. Remember that its true purpose isn't in the programs or services, important as they are. Its purpose is in the connections it creates, the dignity it preserves, the isolation it ends. When I asked you for help with that leaking roof and you called me just a burden, it hurt more than I let on. Not because of the money. I would have found a way to fix the roof eventually, but because it revealed how completely we had lost connection with each other. That's the real tragedy of aging in our society. Not the physical limitations or financial challenges, but the erosion of meaningful bonds with the people who matter most. The Foundation exists to address that tragedy. Never lose sight of that core mission, even as the work evolves and expands. Every program, every initiative should ultimately serve to remind people of all ages that we need each other. That independence is a myth we tell ourselves until life teaches us otherwise. I'm proud of you, son. Proud of the man you've become, the father you are, the work you've chosen to prioritize. Whatever mistakes we made along the way, we ended up where we needed to be, together. With all my love, Dad Bradley carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. As he did so, he thought about the new program Emma and Jake had proposed. Walter was right. The Foundation's true purpose wasn't in the specific services it provided, but in the connections it fostered, particularly the family bonds that provided, the most essential support system for people as they aged. He moved to the living room window, looking out at the quiet street of the neighborhood he'd now called home for a decade. Moving to Millfield had been one of the best decisions he'd ever made. Not just for his relationship with Walter, but for his marriage, his children, and his own sense of purpose and belonging. The irony wasn't lost on Bradley that in trying to rescue his father from a small-town life he'd once considered limiting, he had ended up finding fulfillment in that very same community. The corporate success he'd pursued so single-mindedly in Chicago had ultimately proven less satisfying than the work he now did through the foundation, helping people maintain their dignity and independence as they aged. As Bradley contemplated the foundation's expanded future and the new initiative his children had proposed, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Diana Cortez's name. "Diana, is everything all right?" he answered, concerned about a call so late in the evening. "Yes, everything's fine," she assured him. "I just wanted to let you know that the state funding for the pilot program came through. It's official. I didn't want to announce it at the dedication since we weren't 100% certain, but I just received the confirmation email." "That's fantastic news," Bradley said. "Dad would be thrilled." "There's more," Diana continued. "The National Council on Aging has reached out. They want to feature the foundation as a case study in their next policy brief on community-based senior support models. They're particularly interested in the intergenerational aspects of our programs." Bradley felt a surge of pride. From a local foundation to a national model, that's quite a journey. "It is," Diana agreed. "Walter never sought recognition, but I think he'd be pleased to know that the work will influence senior support programs across the country." After they hung up, Bradley found himself thinking about that leaking roof from a decade ago, the seeming disaster that had set everything in motion. If the roof hadn't leaked, if Walter hadn't needed to ask for help, if Bradley hadn't revealed the worst version of himself with those thoughtless words, if Walter hadn't won the lottery and chosen to use it as he did. Life was strange that way, Bradley reflected. Sometimes what seemed like misfortune was actually the beginning of transformation. Sometimes the words you most regretted saying became the catalyst for becoming someone better. Sometimes a father's greatest gift to his son was the opportunity to remember what truly mattered. Bradley made his way to the kitchen to make a cup of tea, passing the family photos that lined the hallway. There was Walter standing proudly beside the restored Impala, with Jake. Walter at Emma's college graduation. Walter is surrounded by the family at Christmas, his face alight with contentment. Walter at the Foundation's 5th anniversary celebration, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the spotlight, but deeply proud of what had been accomplished. The lottery winnings that had once seemed so significant, the millions of dollars that had left Bradley momentarily speechless with anticipation, then with disappointment, had long ceased to be the point of the story. Most of that money was gone now, channeled into the Foundation's work, invested in changing lives and strengthening communities. What remained, what had grown and multiplied beyond any financial calculation, was the impact of Walter's choice to use his unexpected fortune not for personal comfort, but for reconciliation and service. As Bradley waited for the kettle to boil, he looked out the kitchen window at the starry sky above Millfield. Somewhere in that vastness, he liked to think, his father was watching, not from a place of judgment, but with the same quiet pride he'd shown in life. Watching as the seeds he'd planted continued to grow, as the bridges he'd built between generations continued to stand, as the son who had once called him just a burden continued the work of ensuring that no senior in their community would ever feel like a burden again. The Walter Thompson Family Foundation's new chapter was just beginning. The state pilot program would expand its model to new communities. Emma and Jake's proposed legacy grant would address the root causes of senior isolation and vulnerability. The national recognition would spread its approach even further, and, through it all, Walter's simple philosophy would continue to guide the work. That family, both biological and chosen, was not a burden, but a blessing. That independence was less important than interdependence. That wealth was measured not in dollars, but in connection. Bradley poured his tea and raised the cup in a silent toast to his father. "You left me speechless one last time, Dad," he murmured. "With the legacy you created and the example you set, I'll do my best to carry it forward." Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, pattering against the roof that had once been the focal point of such conflict and transformation. But unlike that long-ago storm, this one threatened no damage, presaged no crisis. The roof was sound, the foundation secure, the home beneath it filled with purpose and meaning that would weather whatever storms might come. 15 years later, the Walter Thompson Community Center stood proudly in the heart of Millfield, its modern architecture blending harmoniously with the historic buildings surrounding it. Inside the center's main auditorium, a crowd had gathered for the 15th anniversary celebration of the Walter Thompson Family Foundation and the official launch of its newest initiative. Bradley Thompson, now in his early 60s with fully silver hair, stood at the podium, flanked by large screens displaying photos of the foundation's history. Behind him sat Emma, Jake, and Melissa, along with Diana Cortez, now retired but still actively involved as an honorary board member. 15 years ago, Bradley began, his voice steady and confident, my father used an unexpected lottery win to create something none of us could have imagined. What began as one man's response to a personal situation has grown into a network of programs spanning 7 counties and serving thousands of seniors annually. He gestured to the timeline displayed on the screens, showing the foundation's evolution from its humble beginnings to its current status as a nationally recognized model for community-based senior support. My father is no longer with us, but his vision continues to guide everything we do. He understood something fundamental that many of us take too long to learn, that we are all connected, that independence is a myth, and that our greatest strength lies in acknowledging our need for one another. Bradley paused, making eye contact with various audience members. The crowd included foundation staff, program participants, community partners, and representatives from senior advocacy organizations across the country who had come to witness the launch of the Foundation's most ambitious program yet. Today, we're proud to announce the official launch of the Walter Thompson Legacy Network, a nationwide initiative that will bring our model of intergenerational connection and support to communities across America. Applause filled the auditorium as Emma stepped forward to join her father at the podium. At 31, she became the Foundation's executive director after completing her doctorate in public policy with a focus on aging and community-based care models. The Legacy Network represents the culmination of 15 years of learning, adaptation, and growth, Emma explained. It will provide resources, training, and support to communities seeking to establish their own programs based on our model. But more than that, it will create a collaborative network where communities can share innovations, challenges, and successes. She directed attention to the screen, which now displayed a map of the United States with dozens of points illuminated. These are the communities that have already committed to joining the network. By the end of next year, we anticipate over 100 participating communities across 30 states. Jake, now a major in the Marine Corps who had taken leave to attend the event, stepped forward next. Despite his military bearing, his expression held the same warmth that had characterized his grandfather. The Legacy Network will include a special focus on veterans, he explained. Inspired by Frank Donovan and other veterans who found renewed purpose through our Foundation's programs, we've developed specialized components addressing the unique challenges faced by aging veterans, particularly those who have become disconnected from family support systems. The audience's attention shifted to a framed photo prominently displayed on stage, Walter standing beside Frank Donovan at the Foundation's 5th anniversary celebration. Frank had passed away 3 years after Walter, but his impact on the Foundation's approach to serving veterans remained profound. Melissa joined her family at the podium, her professional demeanor softened by evident pride in what they had accomplished together. Perhaps the most significant component of the Legacy Network, she continued, is the Family Reconciliation Initiative that Emma and Jake conceptualized shortly after Walter's passing. This program specifically addresses family estrangement, involving seniors, providing mediation, counseling, and support to help heal relationships that have broken down due to misunderstanding, geographic distance, or life circumstances. She gestured to a dignified elderly woman seated in the front row. Patty Reynolds here was one of our first program directors, bringing her personal experience and professional skills to help shape an approach that has now successfully reunited over 200 families in our region alone. Patty nodded in acknowledgement, her eyes bright with emotion. Now in her 70s herself, she had devoted her later career to helping other families avoid the isolation and vulnerability that had once threatened her and her mother. Bradley reclaimed the podium, his expression reflective. None of this would exist if not for a series of events that began with a leaking roof and a painful conversation. My father needed help, and I responded by calling him just a burden, words I would have given anything to take back. The audience grew silent, many having heard pieces of the Foundation's origin story, but never so directly from Bradley himself. When my father won the lottery shortly after that conversation, he could have simply fixed his roof and lived comfortably for the rest of his days. He could have cut me out of his life entirely, which I would have deserved. Instead, he chose to create an opportunity, not just for himself, not just for me, but for an entire community. Bradley's voice caught slightly before he continued. The lesson my father taught me, the lesson that drives everything this foundation does, is that our lowest moments can become turning points if we have the courage to acknowledge our mistakes and the wisdom to choose connection over resentment. Emma placed a supportive hand on her father's shoulder as he gathered himself. The Walter Thompson Legacy Network will carry that lesson forward, creating opportunities for reconciliation, rediscovery of purpose, and intergenerational connection in communities nationwide. Not because we believe every broken relationship can be fixed, but because we know that many can be, if given the right support at the right time. As Bradley concluded his remarks, the screens behind him displayed a new image, the official logo of the Walter Thompson Legacy Network, incorporating elements of the Foundation's original logo with new symbols representing its expanded mission and national reach. My father was a simple man who fixed cars for a living, Bradley said. He had no grand ambitions to create a nationwide movement, but he understood something essential about human connection, about dignity, about what truly matters when everything else falls away. The Legacy Network exists to honor and extend that understanding to communities across America. The ceremony continued with presentations from network partners, testimonials from program participants, and a short documentary about the Foundation's impact over 15 years. As the formal proceedings concluded and the crowd dispersed to the reception area, Bradley found himself approached by a middle-aged man he didn't recognize. Mr. Thompson? My name is Robert Collins. I doubt you remember me, but your father helped my family about 12 years ago. Bradley shook the man's hand, acknowledging that he didn't recall the name. My father was facing eviction from his apartment after a series of medical bills depleted his savings, Robert explained. Your father's foundation provided emergency assistance and helped us navigate the healthcare system to reduce his debt. But more than that, your father personally sat down with me and my dad to talk through some old conflicts that had kept us distant for years. Robert's eyes grew misty as he continued. He told us about you and him, about how close you came to losing your relationship permanently. That conversation changed everything for us. Dad lived with me until he passed last year, and those were the best years of our relationship. Bradley felt his own eyes growing damp. Thank you for telling me that. It would have meant the world to my father to know. I'm here today because I've joined the Legacy Network, Robert explained. I'm helping establish a similar foundation in my hometown in Michigan. I wanted you to know that your family's story, your father's wisdom, and your journey together continues to create ripples far beyond what you might imagine. As Robert moved on to greet others, Bradley found himself momentarily overcome. After 15 years of leading the foundation, he had heard countless stories of its impact. But somehow this direct connection to Walter's personal intervention, this living proof of the ripple effect of reconciliation, struck him with particular force. Emma appeared at his side. "Everything okay, Dad?" Bradley nodded, gathering himself. "Just received another reminder of your grandfather's extraordinary impact. Makes me wonder what he would think of all this. How far his simple decision has carried." Emma smiled, her expression so reminiscent of Walter that it sometimes startled Bradley. "I think he'd be pleased but embarrassed by the attention. And I think he'd remind us that it wasn't about him. It was about the principle he stood for. Connection over isolation," Bradley murmured. "Dignity over dependence. Family, biological or chosen, over fragmentation." "Exactly," Emma agreed. "Those principles don't belong to Grandpa alone. They belong to anyone willing to put them into practice." She glanced around at the crowded reception, where network partners from across the country were mingling, sharing ideas, and building relationships. And now, they'll spread even further. As Bradley moved through the reception, greeting guests and thanking supporters, he carried with him the awareness that had changed his life 15 years earlier. That sometimes our worst moments become the foundation for our greatest contributions. That wealth measured in dollars pales beside wealth measured in relationships, and that no one, especially those who have built our communities and raised our families, should ever be considered just a burden. The Walter Thompson Legacy Network would carry that message forward, creating new beginnings from painful endings, connection from isolation, and purpose from loss. It was a legacy that would continue to leave people speechless, not with disappointment or resentment, but with gratitude, hope, and the profound recognition of our essential need for one another. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.